Hi there, I'm Dr. Francesca Zampollo and today we talk about food system design. I'm going to do that by showing you an incredible example called Plant Chicago. If you don't really know what food system design is and what it can do, or if you're interested in being a food system designer but need some inspiration, this video is going to be very useful to you. Because with this video, I'm going to show you how food system design is really important for the planet and ultimately for us as a species. Before we start, just a couple of quick words about food system design. What is food system design? What is a food system? Well, think about a system, and a food system, of course, as a series of nodes. These nodes can be food services like restaurants, cafes, but also individuals, organizations, charities, etc. Designing a food system means designing how things go in and out of each one of these nodes. Designing a food system means designing the way all these nodes are linked to one another. Food system design brings the focus from the individual product or service out to the whole system. By zooming out our perspective, we can more easily design more sustainable solutions. A few weeks ago, I was in Chicago and I was very lucky to be part of a tour organized by Plant Chicago. Plant Chicago is, reading from their website, a non-profit organization established in 2001 by John Edel. His company, Bubbly Dynamics, is also owner and operator of The Plant, a groundbreaking food production space designed to be a net zero closed system loop. This is going to be a practical example of how a very good food system works. This is going to be inspirational. If you will like this video, please give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below what you think of The Plant and or maybe of other food systems that you know of or that you are part of, or maybe of other food systems that you would like me to talk about. I assure you that every like and every comment, to which I always reply, and every share of this video will help this channel grow and be self-sufficient. So thank you in advance. As always, have a lovely day and happy food design.
The Plant is the name of the building. The building is owned by a for-profit company called Bubbly Dynamics. So they were the ones who had this crazy idea to buy an old 100,000 square foot meatpacking plant and say, I'm going to turn this into a farm and food business place. And it's happening. So that's The Plant. Within The Plant, there are 20 distinct businesses. So those are farming, food production, or beverage production companies, along with the nonprofit, which I work for, which is called Plant Chicago. So Plant Chicago runs the farmers market program. We have a year-round farmers market. We also do all the tours, and then we also do demonstration and research projects. So this aquaponic farm, which some of you had time to wander around, is one of our demonstration farming programs. So going back to this diagram, as I mentioned, there are 20 different businesses here. So we'll see a lot of them on the tour and hear about what they're trying to do to reduce food waste and reuse others' waste within the building. So the building itself being reused for food production. And then there are 3 outdoor farms, 2 indoor farms. There's the ice makers, there's a produce distributor, there's a brewery, a bakery, a coffee roaster. There are beehives on the roof, so there's a beekeeper. There's a spice distributor, a cheese distributor, a microgreens operation, and some other things that I'm probably forgetting because I always forget something. Vegan gelato maker. So yeah, and this just shows a lot of the loops that we are trying to close or that are currently being closed. So the biggest loop within this system is food waste. So anytime you have a food business or a farm, as we all already know, that generates a lot of nutrients that right now are not going to people or back to the biological cycle. They're going to the landfill. But so that biggest loop is food waste. That loop will eventually be closed by this machine called an anaerobic digester. So that is something that turns organic materials into a solid, a liquid, and a gas. And this is about halfway completed outside in the yard, and we'll see it on the tour. But when it is completed, it can process 15 tons of food waste per day into that biogas, which can be used to power all the heating and all the processes in the building that need to boil things. But a lot of these smaller loops are actually happening right now. This was a project that Plant Chicago worked on that we're calling our BioBrick project. So basically we harvested some byproducts from different producers in the building. So the brewery, obviously the product that people are interested in with that is the beer, which we'll get to try later. But we went in there and we didn't take their beer, we took their spent grain. So for every batch of beer they brew, they use 2,000 pounds of grain. They boil that, and that's the first step in the beer making process. And sometimes they're brewing as much as 2 to 3 times a week. So that's a resource-intensive process. So we harvested some of that grain. The rest actually gets dumped outside and turned into compost here, right on site. So it's all being diverted right now. We diverted some of it to this project, so that's what this is. Please do not open this jar because this is like a year old and it's going to be really stinky. And then we went out to the coffee roaster who does this. So we've probably all seen these two things. So this is the green coffee bean, which they get direct from the farms, and they roast that and it turns into the brown coffee bean. So what happens during that roasting process is that this fluffy stuff comes off of it. This is called coffee chaff. So it's just like a fluffy, dry material that comes off of the coffee bean when you roast it. So we took that, we combined it with this spent grain, and we used a very low-tech hydraulic press, so just using water and pressure, and we pressed it into these bio bricks. So this is just spent grain and coffee chaff. And then the third business that comes into this equation is the bakery. Can anyone guess what the bakery might want to use something like this for? Fuel, yeah, so it's fuel for fire. So they actually have a big old wood-fired oven that we'll see in their space upstairs. Right now they're getting firewood shipped in from Indiana, so fairly close, but still it's, you know, trees being cut down, and there's a transportation cost to the environment and to them associated with that. So our goal here is to prove that this can be a viable product, that they can actually fire their ovens using waste from the building. Okay, so aquaponics is actually a really good example of a closed loop system. So using waste to fuel another process, which then fuels back into that whole loop. In aquaponics, it is a combination of aquaculture, which is raising fish, and hydroponics, which is growing plants in water. So if you were doing just hydroponics, which there is a hydroponic farm in the building that's run as a business, this is run as part of the nonprofit. So in this system, if you didn't have the fish, you would have to add a nutrient solution to the water. So you would have to actually buy or create a nutrient system and put that in like drops or tablets into the water so that the plants get those nutrients. So when we introduce the fish, who is now hiding as soon as I'm talking about him, speaking up. So we have tilapia fish. You can use any fish for aquaponics, but what's most important about the fish is their waste for this system. So fish waste contains a lot of ammonia. Plants need a lot of nitrogen. So the ammonia from the waste, the fish is swimming around creating waste. That wastewater gets filtered through this very not high-tech filter system. So if you want to come look at it, it's basically just a bunch of like filter nets with some snails and like slugs and other bacteria that we can't see that will actually digest that ammonia and turn it into nitrogen that the plants can absorb. And then in doing that, they actually clean the water and send it back to the fish. So it's constantly the same water recirculating every single time. So compared to traditional outdoor agriculture, it uses about 90% less water, but there are some other inputs that you need to put into the system. So can anyone think of any cons of this system? Any like electricity? Yeah, so ideally this would not be in the basement of an old meatpacking plant. It would be in a greenhouse or somewhere that has access to light because the electricity is very energy intensive and it's also very cost intensive, especially as a small nonprofit. So this is the brewery at the plant. They are called Weiner Beer Company, and this is their brew house. So this is where the process starts. So that's where they bring in those 2,000 pounds of grain, boil that up, add the hops, boil that, cool it down. And to cool that down, they actually use cold water. So they use cold water to cool down the hot water. So one of the big waste products from the brewery right now is just that spent grain, and the water. So you can see just the scale of their equipment here. Behind their brew house, they have their barrel house, where they have a bunch of old wine and bourbon barrels that they age their beers in. And then we'll see inside they have something called a cool ship, which is an old Belgian fermenting technique. So it's basically just a big open vat. So we think of food processes as very like sterile these days, and that everything has to be like enclosed, and we don't want any of the weird little bugs and bacteria getting in. So the cool ship is actually just open and saying we want all those bacteria and all those wild yeast. So they actually built a duct straight from the outdoor farm, which we'll see next, into this cool ship room. And in there they have a giant vat where they pour the hot, it's called the wort. So that's the beer before it ferments with the wild yeast and becomes actual beer. So they pour that in there, and then they have that ferment for about 24 hours. So they just did that yesterday. It's their first time using that piece of equipment. And then they put it in a barrel, and then they wait 2 years. So they do not know what that beer will taste like until 2019. So come back in 2 years and try that cool beer. But they're one of the only ones in the United States that have that kind of equipment for the wild fermentation. So even thinking of the wild yeast and bacteria as kind of lost like waste products that are constantly floating around, they're harnessing those, using it to brew beer. So these companies both rent space from Bubbly Dynamics, the building and landowner here. So on this side we have Patchwork Farms. So they are an urban farm. They have sites here in back of the yards, in East Garfield Park, and then also in Humboldt Park, which is their main farm site. They have a bunch of chickens, they have like a farm cat, and much more land than this. So they're growing kind of a diverse array of vegetables and some fruits over here, and they mainly do farmers markets and CSA. So their big thing is that they want to reach communities with produce. So they do the community supported agriculture model where people pay up front, and then every week throughout the season they receive a box of vegetables. On this side is Pleasant Farms. So they are another outdoor farm. So they grow the produce mostly for their bakery and their restaurant right here. And then on this side is the first portion of that anaerobic digester that we talked about at the beginning. The thing that will turn food waste into the solid, liquid, and a gas that can be used to power a lot of the processes in the building. So now we're going to see a couple of the more historical parts of the building. So this space is about to become a museum about the Stockyards in Packing Town, which is what this part of the neighborhood was known as, that did all the meat packing and processing. This thing up on the ceiling was original to the building. That was the meat rail system that used to go all throughout the building. So from train to butcher to smoker to freezer, back out to train, it would go throughout the whole process. And up here we're going to turn right to see the bakery, but definitely turn left and take a peek at the restrooms on this floor. They are restrooms that are made out of old meat smokers. So there was this giant stainless steel meat smoker that Pure Foods had to leave here when they moved to Indiana, but they couldn't take this giant meat smoker with them when they left. And the building owner does not want to waste anything. They're really into repurposing and repairing things. So they repurpose those meat smokers into bathrooms.
And so all of our ice is formed in these large cabinets over here. We use the block ice method. So there's a freezer plate on the bottom. It's filled with water. And once it's seated, which means that the ice is nucleated on the bottom along with freezer plate, we turn on circulating pumps and that retards the freezing process, causing the ice to form a more homogeneous structure and forcing mineral content out of the ice. So what you end up with is a perfectly clear block with no air bubbles, very little mineral content, and then mineral-heavy water at the top. So our two biggest waste problems are waste ice and waste water. I mean, basically it's the same thing, but one of them's frozen. So how we've dealt with that thus far is all of our waste ice we actually donate to like the other businesses in the plant.
And then this is the coffee roaster, so this is a 4-letter word. They roast coffee and distribute both at our farmers market and then at several cafes in Chicago. One cool thing that they do, just thinking about waste materials or byproducts that are created, they actually put out a lot of their byproducts just in the hallway so everyone can see them and can use them. So this is the bakery at the plant. They're called Pleasant House Bakery, and they do all sourdough bread. So that is keeping with that theme of the brewery, using all the wild yeast and bacteria. So they have a starter culture that they keep open to the air, and that's how they start all their bread. And then the big white brick thing back here is their wood-fired oven. So for them to bake bread is actually about a 48-hour process, because you have to get that sourdough starter culture going, mix that into an actual bread dough, and then you let that rise overnight. So you let it actually ferment. So it's a fermented product, which is what sourdough comes from, because it's slightly tangy. And then the day before they're going to bake, in the afternoon, they actually start a fire in the oven. And then the baker comes in the next morning at 3 a.m., which is why no one's here right now, when it's only like 3:30, because they get here at 3 in the morning. They rake out the fire. The oven gets up to about 1,000 degrees. And then as that oven cools down, they bake the different breads and pastries at the different temperatures. A couple other cool things they're doing, they've, as I think I mentioned downstairs, they've actually taken some of the spent grain from the brewery and milled that into flour, so they have their own flour mill. And then they've also taken some of the leftover yeast from the brewery and used that to kind of boost their sourdough culture.